What if the biggest mistake you have ever made was believing reality begins outside of you? Most people live as if life is a one-way street. The world happens and you react. But the deeper question is this: what if your reactions are not responses to reality, but instructions that shape it? If you grasp that single possibility, everything changes. Because then you are not merely observing a life. You are participating in a feedback system. In physics, observation is not a casual act. Measurement is an interaction. And while we must be careful not to oversimplify quantum concepts, the principle is still powerful as a metaphor for co-creation. The way you attend to something influences what becomes stable and real in your experience. Your attention selects. Your emotion amplifies. Your identity repeats. That is the hidden architecture most people never notice. Here is the open loop you need to sit with. If your internal state is consistently shaping what you call chance, why do the same patterns keep returning? New faces, same story. New job, same ceiling. New year, same frustration? The surface details change, but the signature stays the same. That signature is not luck. It is frequency. Frequency, in this context, is not a mystical buzzword. It is the total pattern of what you repeatedly assume, expect, tolerate, and rehearse, especially when nobody is watching. It is the station your mind is tuned to, and a tuned system does not attract what it wants. It receives what it matches. So let me ask you something uncomfortable. When you imagine the life you desire, do you actually feel like the person who already lives there, or do you feel like an outsider begging to be admitted? Because the nervous system does not move toward what it cannot safely identify with. It will sabotage your progress with logic. It will call fear prudence. It will label expansion as unrealistic. And it will do it convincingly. But what if the real work is not forcing results, but updating the identity that generates your default reality? What if the goal is not to chase outcomes, but to change the internal signal you keep broadcasting? In the next topic, we will expose the most common illusion that keeps people stuck: the belief that imagination is optional when it is actually the gateway to access. Imagination is not fantasy. It is access. Why do some people move toward extraordinary outcomes as if they were inevitable, while others hesitate at the edge of possibility, convinced it is not for them? The difference is not talent. It is not luck. And it is rarely resources. The difference is access. And access begins in the imagination. Most people misunderstand imagination. They treat it as escapism, as daydreaming, as something childish or unrealistic. But in cognitive science, imagination is rehearsal. In neuroscience, it activates similar neural pathways as real experience. And in the architecture of reality co-creation, imagination is the first point of entry into a new identity. If you cannot mentally inhabit a reality, you cannot act from it. And if you cannot act from it, you will never stabilize it. Here is the hidden mechanism. The brain does not move toward what feels foreign. It moves toward what feels familiar. So when you imagine a greater life, but do so from the emotional position of lack, you reinforce separation. You are not embodying the future. You are confirming distance from it. Let me ask you something precise. When you visualize success, do you feel natural inside it? Or do you feel like an imposter trespassing in someone else's life? That emotional signal matters more than the image itself. Imagination is not about seeing more. It is about becoming internally comfortable with more. It is the act of allowing your nervous system to register expansion as safe. When you repeatedly imagine yourself already having what you desire, and you allow yourself to feel grounded, calm, and normal inside that scenario, you are not fantasizing. You are updating your internal baseline. And once the baseline shifts, your perception changes. You begin to notice opportunities that were always there, but previously invisible to your identity. You enter rooms differently. You speak differently. You negotiate differently. Not because you forced confidence, but because your self-concept adjusted. This is why imagination precedes manifestation. Not as magic, but as alignment. It is access before opportunity. So here is the question you must confront. Are you using imagination to escape your current reality, or to train your system to accept a new one? Because only one of those creates movement. If this perspective is expanding your understanding, subscribe to the channel and like this video. Your engagement supports the continuation of this work. The scarcity filter you don't know you're using. Have you ever noticed how quickly your mind calculates what you can't afford, can't reach, or can't become, before you even fully explore the possibility? That reflex is not logic. It is conditioning. Most people believe they are evaluating opportunities rationally. In reality, they are filtering life through a scarcity identity. The moment they encounter something expansive, a better home, a higher level of income, a healthier relationship, the mind does not ask, "How can I align with this?" It asks, "Why is this unrealistic for me?" That question reveals everything. When you browse properties, do you immediately sort by the lowest price bracket? When you consider a business idea, do you first think about the obstacles? When you imagine a new version of yourself, do you instinctively measure it against your current limitations? That is the scarcity filter in action. Here is the subtle mechanism. Your brain is wired for cognitive efficiency. It uses past experience to predict future possibility. But if your past was shaped by limitation, your predictions will be conservative. The mind then calls this conservatism prudence or maturity. Yet what it is actually protecting is identity stability. The identity you have repeated becomes your psychological comfort zone, even if it is uncomfortable in material terms. This is why people often sabotage breakthroughs. Expansion feels destabilizing. A higher income demands a new self-concept. A healthier relationship demands emotional maturity. A new environment demands behavioral upgrades. And the old identity resists. But understand this clearly. Scarcity is not always about money. It is about perceived access. It is the belief that certain realities belong to other people. And the moment you unconsciously label something as belonging to someone else's category, your nervous system withdraws energy from it. Let me ask you something direct. When you see someone living the life you desire, do you feel inspired or subtly threatened? That reaction exposes your tuning. Scarcity logic keeps you evaluating life from your current coordinates. Abundance logic asks a different question. What would need to shift in me for this to be natural? The first approach protects the past. The second opens the future. And here is the turning point. Once you become aware of your internal filters, you can interrupt them. You can pause before dismissing an opportunity. You can question your automatic calculations. You can experiment with new environments, even briefly, to expand your internal reference points. because the filter is not reality. It is programming. And in the next topic, we will examine where that programming begins and why childhood conditioning silently determines your frequency long before you consciously choose it. The programming you did not choose. Have you ever asked yourself who installed the beliefs you now defend as common sense? Before you formed ambitions, before you defined success, before you even understood money, relationships, or status, your nervous system was already learning. It was recording tone, emotional climate, repeated phrases, stress patterns, and unspoken rules. And it was doing so without analysis, without consent, without filters. This is where frequency begins. A child does not evaluate beliefs. A child absorbs them. If scarcity was spoken daily, scarcity became familiar. If anxiety surrounded money, ambition may now trigger tension. If love felt conditional, success may feel dangerous because it threatens connection. These patterns are not philosophical positions. They are embodied memory. And here is the uncomfortable truth. Most adults are still operating from scripts written before they had the capacity to question them. Your brain seeks coherence. It prefers predictable emotional territory over unpredictable expansion. So even when you consciously desire more, your subconscious may associate more with instability, criticism, or loss. And it will quietly guide your behavior back to what feels known. Let me ask you something carefully. When you begin to grow, do you notice subtle guilt? Do you feel a pull to minimize yourself so others remain comfortable? Do you rationalize stepping back just as momentum builds? That is not weakness. That is unresolved programming protecting old emotional bonds. Environment reinforces this coding. If you remain surrounded by conversations, media, and relationships that normalize limitation, your nervous system recalibrates downward. Not because you lack discipline, but because repetition stabilizes identity. Frequency is sustained by immersion. This is why transformation cannot rely on motivation alone. Motivation is episodic. Programming is continuous. But here is the empowering realization. What was installed unconsciously can be upgraded consciously. Neuroplasticity is not a motivational slogan. It is biological reality. Repeated thought, repeated emotion, repeated behavior. These reshape neural pathways. And when you deliberately expose yourself to new environments, new standards, and new internal narratives, you begin rewriting the script. The key is awareness. Once you see the pattern, you are no longer fully governed by it. So, the real question becomes, are your current limits authentic reflections of who you are, or echoes of who you were trained to be? In the next topic, we will explore why effort alone cannot override frequency, and why reality responds to resonance far more than to struggle. Reality responds to resonance, not effort. Why do some people struggle relentlessly for years with minimal results, while others seem to create momentum with surprising ease? If effort alone determined outcomes, the hardest working individuals would always be the most prosperous, fulfilled, and influential. But that is not what we observe. We see people exhausted and stagnant. We see others aligned and accelerating. So, what is the hidden variable? Resonance. In physics, resonance occurs when a system vibrates in harmony with a frequency that amplifies its response. In human terms, resonance is the coherence between what you believe, what you feel, what you expect, and how you act. When these elements align, energy is not scattered. It is directed. Effort without resonance creates friction. You push, but internally you doubt. You speak positively, but emotionally you anticipate disappointment. You take action, but secretly expect failure. The outer movement contradicts the inner signal, and reality mirrors that contradiction. Let me ask you something precise. When you work toward your goals, does your internal dialogue support you or quietly undermine you? Because reality does not respond to surface declarations. It responds to dominant patterns. Imagine a radio. No matter how passionately you desire a different station, the sound you receive depends entirely on what frequency you are tuned to. Turning the volume up does not change the station. Increasing effort does not change alignment. This is where most people become frustrated. They equate intensity with effectiveness. They believe that pushing harder will compensate for internal misalignment. But when belief, emotion, and identity are not synchronized, the system dissipates energy. Resonance reduces resistance. When you genuinely identify with your desired outcome, when it feels natural rather than aspirational, your decisions shift subtly. You decline distractions more easily. You tolerate higher standards. You recognize opportunities that match your new baseline. The process feels less like force and more like inevitability. And here is the deeper layer. Resonance is neutral. It does not judge your desires. It amplifies whatever pattern is consistent. If you rehearse doubt daily, doubt stabilizes. If you rehearse confidence with emotional coherence, confidence stabilizes. So, the critical question becomes this: are you trying to overpower reality, or are you tuning yourself to it? Because in the next topic, we will dismantle the myth that success and failure are measures of worth. They are not hierarchies. They are different stations. And changing stations requires precision, not strain. Success is not superiority. It is tuning. What if success has nothing to do with being better and everything to do with being tuned differently? Most people secretly interpret outcomes as moral verdicts. If someone is wealthy, they must be smarter. If someone is struggling, they must be less capable. We turn results into hierarchies of worth. But this interpretation distorts the mechanism. Success and failure are not ethical categories. They are alignment outcomes. Imagine two radios in the same room. One is tuned to classical music. The other is tuned to static. Neither radio is morally superior. They are simply calibrated to different frequencies. The content they receive reflects their tuning, not their value. Human experience functions in a similar way. Your dominant beliefs, emotional set points, habitual thoughts, and environmental exposure determine your tuning. And tuning determines what you consistently perceive, attract, and sustain. When someone appears lucky, what you are often witnessing is coherence. Their internal station matches the external opportunities available at that frequency. Let me ask you something confronting. When you see someone thriving in an area where you feel blocked, do you interpret it as proof that they are special or as evidence that a different configuration is possible? The answer reveals your relationship to expansion. If you believe success belongs to a rare category of people, your nervous system will treat it as foreign territory. And what feels foreign triggers subtle withdrawal. But if you understand success as tuning, adjustable, trainable, accessible, then you begin to approach it differently. Tuning does not require comparison. It requires calibration. This means observing your default emotional state. Are you consistently tense or composed? Defensive or receptive? Cynical or curious? These patterns matter. They are not personality traits. They are signal stabilizers. Here is the deeper insight. You cannot sustainably hold a frequency that contradicts your self-image. If you unconsciously identify as someone who never quite gets ahead, you will unconsciously generate evidence to confirm it. Not because you intend to fail, but because coherence feels safer than contradiction. Changing stations is not about rejecting who you are. It is about upgrading who you believe yourself to be. And in the next topic, we will examine the force that stabilizes or disrupts your tuning more than anything else, your environment. The environment that shapes your frequency. How much of your current reality is truly yours, and how much is the product of the environments you repeatedly inhabit? Most people believe their thoughts are independent. They assume their beliefs are personal conclusions. But environment is one of the most underestimated forces in frequency stabilization. What you hear daily, what you see repeatedly, what conversations surround you, these elements quietly calibrate your internal signal. Environment is not neutral. If you spend years immersed in conversations about limitation, instability, or complaint, your nervous system adapts. It normalizes that emotional climate. It begins to expect difficulty. And expectation is not passive. It guides perception. It filters opportunity. It influences decisions before you consciously evaluate them. Let me ask you something precise. When you leave certain spaces or conversations, do you feel energized or subtly drained? That reaction is data. Without awareness, environment programs frequency. With awareness, environment becomes a tool. Consider this carefully. High performers in any field rarely isolate themselves in stagnant ecosystems. They expose themselves to higher standards. They spend time in environments where the desired reality is already normalized. Not to imitate blindly, but to recalibrate what feels possible. This is why access precedes opportunity. When you physically enter spaces aligned with your desired future, whether it is a different neighborhood, a professional circle, a refined workspace, or a disciplined routine, you interrupt your old baseline. Your mind registers a new reference point, and reference points shape identity. The shift is subtle but powerful. What once felt too much begins to feel reasonable. What once felt intimidating begins to feel attainable. However, this requires intention. If you remain passively embedded in environments that reinforce your old frequency, your attempts at growth will feel unstable. You will oscillate between expansion and contraction, between clarity and doubt. Environment either anchors your upgrade or sabotages it. The key question becomes this: are you deliberately choosing the environments that support your next identity, or are you unconsciously reinforcing your previous one? Because in the next topic, we will go deeper into why physical access, stepping into aligned spaces, often triggers breakthroughs long before material results appear. Access changes identity before results appear. What happens when you step into a space that reflects the life you desire before you fully deserve it? Most people wait for proof before they allow themselves access. They tell themselves, when I earn more, I will visit places like that. When I feel confident, I will enter that room. When I succeed, I will upgrade my environment. But this sequence is reversed. Access precedes stabilization. When you physically enter environments aligned with your desired future, something subtle shifts. Your senses gather evidence. Your nervous system processes new reference points, and identity begins to stretch. This is not mystical. It is neurological. The brain builds its understanding of possibility through experience, not theory, not affirmation alone. Experience. When you walk through a neighborhood you once believed was not for you, when you attend an event at a level you aspire to, when you sit in spaces that reflect your future standard, your mind cannot ignore the data. Let me ask you something honest. How often do you avoid entering certain environments because they trigger discomfort? That discomfort is not a warning. It is expansion friction. The first time you step into a higher frequency space, your old identity feels exposed. You may compare yourself. You may feel temporarily small. But if you remain present instead of retreating, something remarkable happens. The unfamiliar begins to normalize. And normalization is the foundation of alignment. When something becomes normal, your body stops resisting it. Your language adapts. Your posture shifts. Your standards recalibrate. Not because you forced yourself, but because your internal baseline updated. This is why access must be intentional. You do not need to pretend to be someone else. You need to allow your system to experience your next level long enough to stop rejecting it. That might mean exploring better environments, adjusting your daily routine, refining your workspace, or spending time around people who embody the traits you want to stabilize. Exposure reduces psychological distance. And once the mind registers that a higher reality is not forbidden, but accessible, it begins to reorganize decisions accordingly. So, the question becomes, are you waiting for results to grant yourself access, or are you granting yourself access to generate results? In the next topic, we will explore how sensory immersion accelerates reprogramming and dissolves internal resistance faster than intellectual understanding ever could. The power of sensory imprinting. Why do some experiences change you instantly, while others, no matter how logically convincing, leave you exactly the same? Because the nervous system does not transform through information alone. It transforms through sensation. You can read about confidence for years and still hesitate in critical moments. You can understand abundance intellectually and still feel tension around money. Knowledge informs the mind. Sensory experience imprints the body. And the body is where identity stabilizes. Your brain encodes reality through sight, sound, touch, smell, and spatial awareness. When you physically experience something aligned with your desired future, you create a multi-sensory imprint. That imprint carries emotional weight. And emotional weight determines what the subconscious accepts as real. Let me ask you something specific. Have you ever walked into a space and immediately felt different, more focused, more composed, more capable, without consciously trying? That reaction is sensory alignment. When you touch the materials of a higher standard environment, hear conversations at a different level of thinking, observe how people move and speak in spaces of confidence, your system gathers embodied evidence. This reduces internal resistance because the unknown becomes tangible. Resistance often exists because the future feels abstract. Abstraction creates distance. Distance sustains doubt. But when you inhabit your desired frequency physically, even temporarily, the gap narrows. The new identity is no longer theoretical. It has texture. It has sound. It has atmosphere. This is why strategic exposure accelerates growth. If you want to elevate your financial baseline, spend time in environments where financial stability is normalized. If you want emotional maturity, observe and interact with people who regulate themselves under pressure. If you want refinement, immerse yourself in spaces that reflect discipline and excellence. The senses bypass argument. And here is the crucial insight. Once your nervous system registers a higher possibility as physically real, it cannot fully return to ignorance. The old limitations feel smaller. The previous station loses authority. So, the deeper question becomes this: are you feeding your senses with evidence of your current limits, or with evidence of your next level? Because in the next topic, we will examine why once the mind truly sees possibility, expansion becomes irreversible and retreat becomes increasingly uncomfortable. Once you see it, you cannot unsee it. Have you ever noticed that the moment you truly recognize a new possibility, your old limitations begin to feel intolerable? That is not coincidence. It is cognitive expansion. There is a point in every transformation when exposure turns into awareness. Before that moment, limitation feels normal. After that moment, it feels constricting. The external circumstances may not change immediately, but internally, something irreversible occurs. Once the mind registers a higher standard as possible, the previous narrative loses authority. This is not motivational language. It is neurological restructuring. Your brain builds predictive models based on perceived possibility. When you genuinely encounter a new level, whether through environment, mentorship, experience, or internal breakthrough, you expand your internal map. And once the map expands, contraction becomes psychologically uncomfortable. Let me ask you something important. Is there an area of your life where you now know you are capable of more, but you have not yet acted on it? That tension you feel is evidence of expansion without alignment. Awareness creates responsibility, not in a moral sense, but in an energetic one. You cannot convincingly return to the belief that something is impossible once you have seen it embodied. You may delay, you may hesitate, you may rationalize, but deep down you know, and that knowing destabilizes the old identity. This is why some people experience restlessness after growth. They are no longer satisfied with patterns they once tolerated. Conversations that once felt normal now feel small. Habits that once felt comforting now feel misaligned. It is not arrogance. It is recalibration. However, expansion alone is not enough. Here lies the danger. Awareness without integration can create frustration. You see the next level, but you hesitate to fully embody it. And hesitation creates internal conflict. So, the critical move at this stage is commitment. Once you see possibility, you must decide whether to align with it or retreat into familiarity. Retreat is temporary comfort. Alignment is long-term coherence. The universe does not retract expanded awareness. It waits for your integration. And in the next topic, we will explore why opportunities begin to surface after alignment and why many people unconsciously reject them at the threshold of breakthrough. When opportunity appears, will you recognize it? What if opportunities have already appeared in your life, but you dismiss them because they did not match your old self-image? Many people say they are waiting for a breakthrough. But breakthroughs rarely arrive as dramatic, unmistakable events. They arrive as invitations, subtle openings, conversations, ideas, introductions, moments that require a slightly upgraded version of you to say yes. And here is the crucial truth. Opportunity follows alignment, but it tests identity. When you begin to shift internally, when your beliefs recalibrate, when your emotional baseline stabilizes, when your environment supports expansion, your perception changes. You start noticing options that previously blended into the background. You hear proposals differently. You evaluate risks differently. You consider possibilities you once would have rejected automatically. But noticing is not the same as accepting. Let me ask you something precise. When a new possibility challenges your current comfort level, do you interpret the discomfort as growth or as a warning to retreat? This is where self-sabotage hides. Self-sabotage is not dramatic. It is subtle. It sounds like logic. It presents itself as caution. It disguises fear as practicality. You may tell yourself, "This is not the right time. I need more preparation. I am not fully ready yet." And sometimes that is true, but often it is identity protecting familiarity. Remember, your nervous system prefers coherence over expansion. If an opportunity requires you to step beyond your previous self-concept, the system may trigger hesitation. The irony is this: people often ask the universe for change, but when change arrives in a form that demands growth, they decline. Opportunity does not always feel comfortable. It feels stretching. And stretching is misinterpreted as danger when you are not used to expansion. So the real question becomes, can you distinguish between genuine misalignment and growth discomfort? One contracts you. The other challenges you. Aligned opportunities may feel intimidating, but they resonate with your evolving identity. There is fear, but also clarity. Resistance, but also excitement. That mixture is the edge of transformation. If you continuously ignore these invitations, your old station regains strength. But if you accept, even imperfectly, you reinforce your new frequency. And in the next topic, we will uncover the root of hesitation itself, the internal shadows and limiting beliefs that surface precisely when growth begins. The shadow that resists your expansion. Why does fear often intensify at the exact moment you begin to grow? You would think that progress would feel purely empowering, that alignment would feel clean and effortless. But for many people, the closer they move toward a breakthrough, the stronger the internal resistance becomes. Doubt grows louder. Old insecurities resurface. Unexpected distractions appear. This is not coincidence. It is shadow activation. Your shadow is not evil. It is unexamined programming. It is the collection of unresolved beliefs, suppressed emotions, and inherited narratives that were never consciously updated. And when you attempt to expand beyond your historical identity, these patterns surface, not to punish you, but to maintain coherence. Let me ask you something honestly. When growth begins, do you suddenly remember every past failure? Do you replay moments of rejection? Do you hear internal voices that question your worth or competence? That is the shadow protecting the old structure. Your nervous system equates familiarity with safety. Even if your familiar state was limitation, it was predictable. Growth introduces uncertainty, and uncertainty activates stored memories associated with instability, criticism, or loss. This is why self-sabotage feels rational. You might procrastinate at critical moments. You might overanalyze until momentum fades. You might create unnecessary conflict. Or you might withdraw quietly just as progress becomes visible. None of these behaviors are random. They are attempts to restore the previous equilibrium. But here is the empowering truth. The emergence of resistance is evidence of expansion, not failure. When the shadow appears, it reveals exactly what needs integration. If you avoid it, you repeat it. If you confront it, you dissolve it. Confronting does not mean aggression. It means awareness. It means asking, what belief is being threatened right now? It means recognizing that discomfort does not automatically signal misalignment. It may signal transformation. Shadow work is not separate from manifestation. It is central to it. Because magnetism requires coherence. And coherence cannot exist while unconscious patterns contradict your conscious intentions. So, the real question becomes this. When resistance surfaces, will you interpret it as proof you should stop, or as confirmation that you are approaching the edge of your old identity? In the next topic, we will examine how true magnetism emerges, not from force, but from alignment between mindset, environment, and action. Magnetism is alignment, not force. Why do some people seem to attract opportunities, partnerships, and success with minimal strain, while others chase relentlessly and still feel behind? The answer is not intensity. It is coherence. Magnetism is often misunderstood as charisma, charm, or mystical influence. But at its core, magnetism is alignment. It is the state in which your mindset, your environment, and your actions move in the same direction without internal contradiction. When these three elements converge, friction decreases. Energy stops leaking. Decisions become clearer. Timing improves, not because the universe suddenly favors you, but because you are no longer broadcasting mixed signals. Let me ask you something precise. Are your daily actions truly reflecting the identity you claim to be building? You may say you value growth, yet surround yourself with stagnation. You may declare abundance, yet tolerate chaos in your routines. You may seek high-level outcomes, yet repeatedly accept low-level standards. These inconsistencies weaken magnetism. Alignment simplifies everything. When your internal beliefs support expansion, your emotional state stabilizes. When your emotional state stabilizes, your perception sharpens. When perception sharpens, you recognize aligned actions. And when your actions reinforce your identity, the cycle strengthens itself. This is not mystical attraction. It is systemic coherence. Think of magnetism as resonance reinforced by behavior. If you believe in your capacity but never act accordingly, alignment collapses. If you act boldly but internally doubt yourself, coherence fractures. If you change environments but cling to old narratives, your signal remains unstable. Magnetism requires integration. Here is the deeper insight. When alignment is achieved, effort feels different. It is still present, but it is no longer heavy. You work, but without desperation. You plan, but without anxiety. You move forward, but without forcing. The system supports you because the system is unified. And this is why chasing rarely works. Chasing implies distance. It implies separation between you and the desired outcome. Magnetism eliminates that separation by embodying the state before the result fully materializes. So, the critical question becomes this: are you trying to pull reality toward you, or are you becoming the version of yourself that naturally matches it? In the next topic, we will address a sensitive but essential subject: the role of money in frequency, prosperity, and responsibility. Money is a tool, not a moral verdict. Why is money so emotionally charged? Why does it trigger pride in some, guilt in others, and discomfort in many? If money were simply paper or digital code, it would not carry such psychological weight. Yet for most people, it represents far more than exchange. It represents safety, validation, power, status, survival, and sometimes even worth. But here is the distortion. Money is not a measure of spiritual value. It is a tool. Prosperity does not make someone morally superior. Scarcity does not make someone spiritually pure. These interpretations are projections layered onto a neutral system of exchange. Money amplifies what already exists. If someone is disciplined, money expands their leverage. If someone is chaotic, money magnifies instability. If someone is generous, money increases impact. If someone is insecure, money may intensify that insecurity. Let me ask you something honest. When you imagine having significantly more money, what emotion surfaces first? Excitement? Anxiety? Guilt? Doubt? Your immediate reaction reveals your internal programming. For many, wealth subconsciously equals risk. It may threaten belonging. It may challenge inherited narratives about humility or identity. It may trigger fears of visibility or responsibility. And so, without realizing it, people cap their own financial expansion to preserve emotional equilibrium. But stability and freedom require resources. Financial prosperity is not about vanity. It is about optionality. It reduces survival pressure. It creates space for creativity. It allows generosity without self-sacrifice. It strengthens autonomy. And autonomy stabilizes frequency. When basic needs are constantly threatened, your nervous system operates in contraction. Expansion becomes secondary. Creative alignment becomes difficult. Survival consumes bandwidth. So money, while neutral, directly influences your energetic baseline. However, prosperity demands responsibility. You cannot sustain increased resources without structure, discernment, and maturity. Alignment without discipline collapses. Desire without organization destabilizes. Vibrational coherence must be paired with grounded action. So the real question becomes this: are you rejecting prosperity to protect an outdated identity, or are you preparing yourself to steward it responsibly? In the next topic, we will bring everything together into a clear and practical formula, the sequence that transforms imagination into access, access into opportunity, and opportunity into sustainable expansion. The formula of expansion. What if transformation is not complicated, but precise? After everything we have explored, identity, imagination, frequency, environment, shadow, alignment, you might be wondering, what is the actual sequence? What is the practical structure that turns theory into lived reality? There is a formula, not mystical, not abstract, sequential. Step 1. Imagine and feel yourself already having what you desire. This is not delusion. It is calibration. You are not pretending results exist. You are training your nervous system to register expansion as normal. When you repeatedly visualize your desired life while maintaining emotional stability, calm, grounded, natural, you reduce internal resistance. You shift your baseline. Let me ask you something. When you picture your next level, does it feel distant or familiar? Familiarity is the goal. Step 2. Access environments aligned with that reality. Do not wait for perfection. Enter spaces that reflect your intended standard. Adjust your daily routine. Upgrade your surroundings incrementally. Spend time where your future identity is embodied by others. Exposure reinforces imagination. It makes possibility tangible. Step 3. Accept opportunities and clear limiting beliefs continuously. Opportunities will appear in proportion to your alignment, but they will require courage. And as they arise, shadow patterns will surface. Instead of retreating, observe them, challenge them, replace them. This is ongoing maintenance. Expansion is not a one-time event. It is a repeated adjustment. The formula is simple. Imagine and feel. Access and immerse. Accept and integrate. But here's the crucial detail. Consistency determines stability. You cannot imagine once and expect permanence. You cannot enter a new environment briefly and expect automatic recalibration. You cannot accept one opportunity and assume identity is permanently upgraded. Frequency is reinforced through repetition. The more coherent your internal state becomes, the more your actions reflect it. The more your actions reflect it, the more your external reality stabilizes around it. This is systemic feedback. And now we arrive at the final layer. In the next topic, we will confront the ultimate question. Are you willing to take authorship of your reality, or will you continue outsourcing responsibility to circumstance? Authorship or circumstance? What if the final barrier between you and the life you desire is not knowledge, not opportunity, not timing, but authorship? At some point, every individual reaches a threshold, a moment where the evidence is clear. You understand frequency. You recognize programming. You see how environment shapes identity. You know that imagination precedes access, and access precedes opportunity. You understand alignment. You have seen your shadow. You know the formula. And yet, a deeper question remains. Will you take ownership of your signal? Because authorship is not a concept. It is a decision. It is the moment you stop narrating your life as something happening to you and begin recognizing it as something responding to you. Not in a simplistic or naive way. Not ignoring external realities, but acknowledging that your internal configuration continuously interacts with those realities. Circumstances influence you. Yes, but they do not finalize you. Let me ask you something direct. When something goes wrong, what is your first instinct? Blame? Withdrawal? Resignation? Or recalibration? Authorship means recalibration. It means asking, what is this reflecting? Instead of, why is this happening to me? It means observing patterns without collapsing into victimhood. It means understanding that while you cannot control every variable, you are always responsible for your alignment. This is not pressure. It is power. When you adopt authorship, excuses lose their appeal. Comparison loses its sting. You stop measuring your progress against someone else's timeline. You focus on tuning your own system. And here is the paradox. The more responsibility you accept, the lighter you feel. Because control and responsibility are not the same. You do not control the entire field, but you do control your internal coherence. And coherence changes outcomes over time. Authorship requires consistency. It requires that you reinforce your identity daily, that you choose environments deliberately, that you confront your shadow instead of negotiating with it, that you align action with intention repeatedly. The universe is not waiting to judge you. It is responding to you. So, the final question is simple. Will you continue living as a reactor to circumstance, or will you step forward as the conscious architect of your frequency? The answer to that question determines everything that follows. If this message resonated with you, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss the next expansion. Like this video and share it with someone who is ready to take authorship of their reality. Your engagement helps this work reach those who are prepared for transformation.